Hi everyone, my name is Timur Yunusov and today I have my co-speaker Aleksei Stennikov, and our presentation today is POSWorld, Should You Be Afraid of Hands-On Payment Devices? And today we are going to talk about two major point-of-sale vendors and vulnerabilities that we found in their devices. And for us that was quite a journey, absolutely new world, new creatures, new inhabitants with its own rules, and that's why today we are trying to do this maybe a little bit childish metaphor of Pokemons, and we call this world the POSWorld. So what the POSWorld consists of, what the rules are, what creatures do they have, and how secure these creatures are, that's what we are going to answer today. On top of everything, we have PCI SSC, or Payment Card Industry Security Standard Council, and whose main job is to maintain PCI DSS or data security standard. So you see, this is kind of the book of main rules of this world in terms of security. Then we have MasterCard and Visa, two major card brands. We have Verifone and Stennikov, major point-of-sale vendors. Today we are going to talk about only two of them. Then we have issuing and acquiring banks who are doing payments, responsible for cards issuing and for receiving payments. Then we have merchants, essentially shops, and we have customers. And we also have hackers. So hackers can act as rogue merchants or rogue customers, and this is basically how we jumped into this research ourselves. You see, over the last 4 years, we had a few banks and service providers who were particularly interested in how much security is in their devices that they use and their customers use. If you will look at the payment process, hackers can act as external entities against point-of-sale terminals if they are customers, but if they are rogue merchants, they try to compromise the devices and they can try to insert data in card stream fraud and commit fraud on much higher scale, you see. So if you talk about security requirements of PCI, we have a few documents, and each of these documents have dozens of pages with spreadsheets, with requirements, questionnaires. We have PTS, PIN Transaction Security document, and we have PIN Entry Device Security requirements. But I will try to save you time and explain your rules in a few lines. So the main rule of PCI: do not store, send, or process sensitive data, customer, cardholder, or card data without encryption. So these data include PIN codes, track-to data, or CVV codes from the backside of your card. Then, if someone is trying to open a device, it should be detected. So device should be tamper-proof. And once this is detected, you should act. So the terminal should turn on even if it's off and delete sensitive data, which includes encryption keys and payment apps. And we will talk about this a little bit later. And also, terminal needs to indicate that the device has been compromised. So it basically should be turned into a brick. Now let's talk about hackers. So we had a few researchers about point-of-sale security in the past. So within the last 10 years, guys from the University of Cambridge made a research about hacking point-of-sale devices. Then within the last 5 years, we have SR Labs and Carsten Oll who have presented vulnerabilities about major European point-of-sale vendor. And we ourselves, within the last 3 years, made a research about mobile point of sale and security in these devices. So now we are going to talk about the terminals, what is inside, what vulnerabilities they have, how to attack and how to weaponize them. And finally, we sort of know the requirements of this world already, but we still don't understand the rules of how this world operates. And I would like to pass the microphone to Aleksei.
Hi there, thanks Timur. The first step in order to make your own evil and weaponized creature is understanding its weaknesses and internals. Basically, every terminal hides from you a bunch of legacy code, technologies and strange approaches. And it's great to understand the whole technology stack starting from hardware. In this talk, we don't have enough time to describe point-of-sale hardware in details, but we have already published this information on DivCon Payment Village. More details you will find on the Village YouTube channel. I'd recommend you to pay attention to this channel because it also contains other useful information. And now we are going to shed light on software components. It's time to weaponize your POS terminal. We should keep in mind that we are going to break into secured, well-protected and certified devices. When the vendor goes to PCI certification, he should satisfy PCI rules and fill a form like previously discussed one. Suddenly, the successful certification itself don't guarantee that the device is completely unhackable. The first creature to weaponize is in Stennikov pinpad. Let it be Slowpoke. Our findings affect the whole product line of such terminals. There is basically no difference, is it portable or countertop. They all built using the same hardware and use the same Telium 2 operating system. This is just an example of this series, but I'm sure this kind of terminals is well known for all of you. It is expectable that all the communications to the bank servers are encrypted, but there is an alternative way to get into it: the maintenance tools and special modes. The main software for server section is called LLT. It is usually used for application and operating system logs collection, firmware upload, and operating system and application updates. To connect a pinpad to LLT software, you should boot the device with special key combination. What does this mode hide? First of all, it uses a very strange way to establish connection to the device. The terminal itself is recognized as a virtual COM port when USB cable is connected. LLT software brings up PPP connection over this virtual COM port. When this connection is established, the pinpad initiates connection to PC6000 TCP port and waits a response from LLT software. Usually the LLT software sends a command to pinpad to open FTP server in order to get access to some part of device file system. The interesting thing here is the code credentials for every step. Also, no one has an ability to change these passwords because they are part of operating system binaries. The protocol on 6000 TCP port used to open FTP server is called NTPT3. It is completely insecure with absolutely no authentication and other integrity control mechanisms. By exploiting this vulnerability and having direct connection to terminals USB, an attacker gains access to internal FTP servers. It also has some undocumented commands. LLT is allowed to read only file system, the directories, host and swap. One vulnerability allows reading any files whose absolute path is less than 17 characters long. It allows an attacker to obtain cryptographic keys and manipulate traffic between point-of-sale and acquirer. Also, some extra functions of this protocol are buggy too. The third interesting finding in this chain is trace protocol with no authentication and encryption. Trace mode is intended to monitor performance of banking application during development for post-debugging and assist developers with debug capabilities. By using this protocol and having direct connection to the terminal's interfaces, for example USB, an attacker gains access to terminal operating system and application internals via trace command line interface. Anyone has access to this command line interface just using the config file magic and the trace tool from software development kit. Example of trace tool output is the following. This command line interface has help commands in order to get description for every available command. But a research wouldn't be complete without a bunch of non-declared commands. As you may see, it exposes to attacker additional function to get hardware and software status and some additional debug capabilities. As a result, this semi-debug mode allows full control of the pinpad. The exposed commands allow to allocate and deallocate memory, display the contents of all files of the terminal internal file system including encryption keys, and to suspend, resume and terminate processes and threads. The example attack scenario is classical. Allocate the memory for malicious code, then write malicious code to allocated memory. Suspend and modify non-important tasks in order to point to our code, and then just resume suspended task. Finally, we have code execution on any Telium-based Nginx terminals. Is it a good result for such research? Definitely yes. Is it a good news for their customers? Probably no. But anyway, we have another glitches in our research. The next glitch is well-known Verifone terminals. This is an example of their VX series terminal VX520. Let's figure out what can we do with this creature. The entire VX product line uses VX5 operating system. It is proprietary one as in previous example. Executables for VX operating system has .out extension with their own binary format and should be signed in order to be executed on the pin pad. The default password for this type of pin pad discussed many times, but no one changes it. You can find the same password even in ancient Zone XL pin pads from 18th of previous century. To enter the service mode, you have to press F2 and F4 keys during the boot of pin pad and enter the password. This mode allows to modify internal variables and obtain technical information about the exact pin pad model and install updates. Example of such variable is Go variable. It should contain an executable file name for autorun when terminal is turned on. The VX5 based terminal has a file system divided to multiple drives. Some of them mentioned in documentation, but some of them are used internally by the vendor and are contained RAM drive, some partition on NAND flash drive, drives related to boot block, and additional file systems. The drives mentioned below the list are marked as reserved and written by the VX operating system during production. This is a very interesting thing because we haven't found any useful information related to these drives in any sources. In the reason, we paid attention to them and found some gifts from developers. We all know that all executable files should have their digital signatures, but a drive T is another case. Its contents can be modified, and all the binaries you can find there are trusted by operating system by default. You can modify the configuration file on file system menu in order to execute any of .out files from drive T. The most interesting of findings on the internal and undocumented file system is the shell binary. Probably once upon a time this was used for recovery and debugging, but now it's just legacy piece of executable code. To execute it, we should modify Go and R variable, as you can see on this slide. The results of this modification is the following. Instead of merchant application, the pin pad started the kind of shell. It is accessible via serial port and maintenance cable. It has an ability to run signed binaries, list and dump contents of the file system, upload new files to the pin pad, and some other commands. It is very useful, but we still don't have an ability to run our unsigned code. As a result, we can upload any files, execute signed binaries, modify configuration of the device, but we are still limited by digital signature checks. In this case, we already have extended user input from the merchant application to some internal commands. Once a merchant application is limited to the encrypted TMS server interaction and varies from bank to bank, let's focus to vendor-specific issues. We need to look what can we do with some shell commands. When we tried to fuzz user input for some commands, we've got a crash. We passed too many symbols to shell command and we got classic buffer overflow. Also useful thing is in this crash is output on the display. We can see crash addresses and some register contents. As you may be noticed, 13 in hex in the least significant bit of CPSR register means that we got a crash in supervisor mode. It equals to the crash in VRX5 operating system kernel. The investigation of this crash points us to buffer overflow in VRX operating system call. As you can see on the pseudocode, there is a classical memory copy mistake on the stack. Additionally, it is needed to be said that there is no measures turned on in order to prevent code execution. Finally, we have got the code execution on any VRX device, because they all have the same code base. But another interesting thing is the case in the boot chain. Every vendor reinvented their own boot order in the case of pinpad devices. Sometimes the boot order chain is very long. It also has a lot of legacy because almost all of these operating systems developed before traditional secure boot approach became a mainstream. After reset, the zero-stage bootloader should be started. Usually it is located inside MCU in form of mask ROM. It loads the next step bootloader from flash memory and checks its cryptographic signature using the key stored in OTP ROM and any other secure memory. Every next bootloader also should check the cryptographic signature of every loaded piece of code, etc., etc. Finally, when operating system loads an application, it also should check its signature. Now you see the VRX operating system terminal bootlog output. Internally, it is called SBI. As you may see, it can work with USB sticks, and in this case, it loads VRX operating system kernel. Please look at the operating system kernel output. Here you can see the Broadcom CPU model that was previously rebranded to internal Verifone name. This bootloader is located at the start of NAND flash memory. The purpose of interaction with USB flash is factory restore. If USB stick is recognized, it goes to look for signed script file that executes a sequence of actions to burn new operating system kernel, for example. Another interesting ability of this script is to put the bootloader to low-level command line interface. However, we don't have any examples of signed scripts. When we had a look into bootloader, we found some protocol handler. If we dive deeper, we faced with the same protocol as used in usual maintenance for terminal loading. The utility for this protocol is called DDL and can be found in the internet. And finally, there is another classic memory copy related bug was found. The weak logic is contained in the update format parser and allowed us to write any memory regions without any restrictions. The most fast way to exploit this vulnerability is to call restricted part of bootloader. As we have mentioned before, there is very useful command line interface parser, and now we are able to call it. As you can see, this command line interface prompt called without valid signet script file. This mode allows us to access the whole file system, to dump and burn any regions of flash memory, to load any code into memory and pass execution to it. As a result, this pinpad can be exploited using the physical connection before operating system is loaded. The last case is Linux-based MX Series Verifone. This is one of most recent pinpad model, and it is also PCI certified. It has advanced permission settings like supervisor, user, and maintenance modes. Also, the root user isn't allowed to get access to different files on the pinpad file system due to role-based access control settings. We have already seen the research related to these models at DevCon 25, 3 years ago. The MX series of Verifone pin pads already were hacked, but in some reasons we have seen exactly the same problems on our projects with the latest firmwares. The exploitation chain is default password for system mode, command injection in maintenance mode, privilege escalation based on vendor service, and finally race condition in role-based access control configuration. This presentation describes all the steps how to get into this model, but this is not the end of a story about MX series. In the boot log we see the same chip, what already known as BCM5892, surprisingly faced with the same bootloader as in Verix 5 pin pads. But in this case it loads not the proprietary kernel model, it loads U-boot. Finally, it has literally the same code and can be exploited in the same way before operating system is loaded. That's almost all about technical parts of terminal weaponizing, and I am going to pass our virtual floor to Timur.
Now when we are finally familiar with vulnerabilities of POSWorld species, we can try to establish the rules of this world. So rule number 1, I guess, is that if PCI console does not require any specific security measures, they will never be applied in the real world. For example, PCI does not say that you need to delete firmware, and vendors delete only applications on the main operating system. It's also probably quite time-consuming to delete quite a large chunk of firmware with a tiny small battery. Next is keys should be deleted, yeah, but PCI does not specify how exactly vendors should delete their keys. So in most of the cases, vendors just put a special mark on the files in file system saying that files are deleted and not delete them in a very secure way. So rule number 2 is probably that over the years all vendors are doing sort of security through obscurity approach of their devices, of security of their devices. So they were using proprietary operating systems for a long time, they were using special proprietary protocols and outputs, formats of files, formats of physical outputs. You can see that there are a lot of special modes, kill switch combinations which allow to get access to special secret commands, and probably security through obscurity is not the best approach security-wise. Next, let's see at the difference what you can and what you can't do in different models of point of sales. So because Ingenico has a dedicated chip for the cryptography which we could not get access to, it actually should seem very secure even though you can compromise the main part of the reader. However, it's not. So you still are able to send arbitrary packets, that makes sense, we'll come to this just in a minute finally, and you still can clone cards including pin codes and track 2 data and CVV, which is quite strange, and I will explain this just in a minute. The only one difference is that you can't clone terminals themselves because keys for terminals will be stored on a dedicated chip, and the problem with Ingenico is that your malicious code will be rewritten after each reboot, so you will have to infect device after each reboot. So let's talk about cloning cards, cloning pins. How we all would have presumed that pin entry process works, for example. So the customer enters pin on the pin pad, and information goes from there to a dedicated chip for the encryption, and already encrypted goes to the main operating system in the main chip, where it goes in the transaction stream over the network. However, in fact, it's not the case. The algorithm, how most of the vendors do this procedure, is that pin pad, customer enters pin on the pin pad, and it goes straight to the main operating system, to the main app, where to get access to you need to have maximum privileges, root access, or work with the kernel rights. And only after that, from the main app, it goes to the specific chip via API for encryption, gets back already encrypted, and then goes in the transaction stream. So you can see flow here, right? If you'll be able to run special malware, special software which will allow to scrape the memory of the main app and steal the spin code, steal track2 data before it will go to be encrypted, that's it. Hackers can get access to pin codes, to track2 data, and it's quite bad, shall we say. So now let's talk how to clone the terminals. Only one vendor allows to clone the terminals, and to do that you need to steal quite a fistful amount of different keys. You need to steal the keys for encrypting network communication, you need to steal the key for PIN encryption, you need to steal the key for signing message authentication codes, and you need to steal a few additional keys like the key for storage encryption and the key for integrity control for the operating system. But once you've done it, you get a fully functional clone of the original point of sale, and that allows you, for example, to make transactions pretending to be a part of the big merchant and carry out transaction stream fraud, or carry out, for example, money movements and refunds, which is quite nasty at the end. And finally, let's talk about weaponizing terminals and making payments attack. So when we began this project, that was one of the original goals, where customers said, is it possible with infected terminals to carry out some actual fraud for the banks? And we have done this and shown this to our customers, and we actually even done a bit of side research. So once you get access to the transaction fraud, to the transaction stream, it's really easy to send arbitrary packets and try to confirm fraudulent transactions, and it's much easier as if that would be just a regular customer with stolen cards, and these fraudulent transactions will be accepted in the end. So as you may know, European banks now adopting new payment rules called PSD2 or Payment Service Directive across the board, and we've shown how it's possible to bypass PIN requirements, PIN checking process, and reset cumulative limits for contactless transactions. So in normal circumstances, this attack would have required specialist equipment for a few $1,000, and what we have done instead, we just tweaked a couple of bits of information in the transaction stream with modified terminals, and we were able to save us a lot of time and a lot of resources, and we have done these attacks, and fraudulent transactions were accepted using these attacks. So I'm not gonna spoil, you can read about this in our white paper. This research now is about something completely different. So for Ngenica, we have arranged 10 different CVEs, and as you can see, they were informed in 2018. That's why we call this Pokemon a slowpoke. As you can see, it took 2 years for vendor to get back to us and to confirm that vulnerabilities were fixed. The problem is that we still don't even know how badly or how really good they were fixed, because we never received any update, we never received any software or firmware or the hardware with the updates. Verifone, on the other side, is quite good and acting quite proactively. So we informed them in 2018, they get back to us reasonably quickly, and once all vulnerabilities were fixed, they even send us updated devices to confirm from our side that all vulnerabilities were effectively mitigated. So we still have a few open questions. Yeah, one of that is that we still don't know how good Ingenico fixed their vulnerabilities. We never received any updates from them, and these vulnerabilities still can present in the modern versions of their point of sales. We also don't know the difference between end-of-life devices and newer devices that both vendors supply, because at the end of the day, bad security is a bad security, and if you do mistakes and if your developers do mistakes, that means that they probably will be found in the whole range of your products. And then I would like to say thanks to all researchers and reverse engineers who were participating in this project, and thanks to all of you guys. This project would not be done without you. It's a really nice job. And if you have any questions, you can let us know, and we're already publishing our research, our white paper today. So links are available on our Twitter pages, so go ahead and read, and thanks so much for listening to us.